2016 and 2017 was probably not the best time for GoPro. If you saw our Hero 5 versus the Sony action cam review, you saw how much better the stability was on the Sony action cam, and image quality all being equal, it's hard to make the case for GoPro at that point. Couple that with the fact that GoPro released a drone that, well, couldn't stay in the sky, meant a lot of people were thinking about migrating somewhere else for their action cameras. Well, that may have all changed because GoPro just released the Hero 6, which physically looks identical to the Hero 5, but it's what's inside that counts. And they're talking about 2 times the performance. That means higher frame rates at higher resolutions, as well as improved stability and a few other little functions as well. So we are going to put it to the test. How much better is it than the Hero 5? We're gonna take a little walk and we're gonna talk and check some things out, but in the meantime, let's go for a little bike ride. Okay, so my colleague here, our good old Woodrow, and myself are going on a little bike ride. And we are going to test out the 2 GoPros. On the right, which is your left, depending on how I edit this, is the GoPro Hero 5. And on this side is the GoPro Hero 6, the brand new one. And we're gonna test them both for different frame rates, different resolutions, different image quality to see how it all shakes out in the mix. So let's have a little fun. 2.7K, 4K, 24p stabilized. Let's do this thing. All right, we're back. So walk with me here. Let's talk about what we just saw there. Now, I didn't in that footage put any 4K 60 frames a second or the 240 frames a second at 1080p, but what you should have taken away from that is a huge difference in stability from the Hero 6 to the Hero 5, as well as there is a new chip and internal whatever technology inside the Hero 5 that gives us much better dynamic range. When I actually took the cameras out into our parking lot in a very high contrast sunny day, I was able to see that there's about a stop or a stop and a half better in dynamic range out of the Hero 6, and that is both in the flat profile and in the GoPro color profile. It seems to favor the highlights a little bit better than the Hero 5, where the Hero 5 seemed to favor the shadows a bit more, but I think overall you're seeing a better dynamic range. Okay, so let's come back to stabilization. Now, it's better across the board in terms of quality. It crops in less than the Hero 5. It crops in only 5% versus the 10% in the Hero 5. It's available all the way up to 4K at 24p, which the Hero 5 would only give you stabilization at 2.7K and below. Unfortunately, the stabilization isn't available at 60p in the 4K, nor is it available in the 240 frames per second in the 1080p, but it is available at 120 frames. And so when we examine our frame rates, when we look at 120 stabilized in 1080p, it's a pretty good looking image. There's actually not a lot of artifacting. It's pretty solid and it's pretty smooth. Definitely a huge improvement over the GoPro Hero 5. When we get to 240 frames, which is the new frame rate available in the Hero 6, It's pretty terrible. I have to admit that it's kind of a novelty at this point. I wouldn't use it. Obviously, to get that frame rate out of this small sensor, you're gonna have to make some shortcuts in what the sensor can pull off. And as a result, you get a ton of moire and a ton of aliasing. Maybe in environments where there's no hard edges on anything, you might not see it as much, but I think in most particular cases, you're gonna get a ton of artifacts. And that just makes the camera kind of unappealing for me, to be perfectly honest, at that frame rate. But come on, 120 frames a second stabilized at that same resolution looks pretty darn good. So I think this is a huge win for GoPro and a huge leap in their technology. And one more final point on image quality. When looking at sort of highlight areas or anything that's super shiny, the sensor does seem to get overloaded a little bit and produces a little bit of color fringing or blooming. This is really nitpicking because I don't think it really matters that much. We're not talking about an ARRI Alexa here. We're talking about a little tiny GoPro camera. So most people aren't even going to notice that. It's just my job to look for those things. But really, it's a super impressive camera considering. So let's talk low light performance. Both cameras go up to 6400 ISO, so there's no difference there. But the new GoPro Hero 6 goes down to 100 ISO. But I think the nominal base rating of the sensor seems to still be around 400. What I did is I brought it into the studio and I started at 800 ISO, slowly making my way up. For 800 and 1600 ISO, I had to keep the lights on, but then shut the lights off for 3200 and 6400 ISO. And obviously 6400 ISO and even 3200 ISO, there's a ton of noise. That's no surprise. I mean, the technology is pretty amazing, but I don't expect anything to be clean at 32 or 6400 ISO with these little tiny cameras. Maybe in a couple of years we might see something like that, but right now it's a bit of a novelty, or unless you need to capture something and you have no lights and it's just, you know, one of those things. But what is sort of striking for me is, again, going into the dynamic range in low light performance. When I strapped it to my bike, which was direct to the handlebars at night in 4K, the dynamic range still really holds up well. We can see into the shadows, but the sky that's a little bit blue and orange still is showing up really nicely. Now, of course, the stability is, you know, not amazing, but that's only because I think it's at nighttime and we've got little points of light that make it obvious that the camera is in fact strapped to my bike, which is taking the full brunt of all the force of the pavement. But overall, I mean, you got to admit, this is a huge leap for GoPro and able to, you know, have images like this. Speaking of dynamic range, let's talk about auto exposure. Now, both of these cameras do very well with auto exposure. I'm actually quite shocked at how well they do going from dark to light environments and how quickly they adapt. However, you can see the new technology working very well in the new GoPro Hero 6 because it holds those highlights so incredibly well when you go into an outside environment from indoors. The reverse, when you come from the outside going in, both cameras seem to be about the same, and I think that's just because the GoPro Hero 6 handles highlights so much better. So let's talk about images and photos. It's still a 12 megapixel photo that you get from the camera, and you can still shoot RAW with it. I didn't see really any differences in the RAW from camera to camera. Looked pretty much about the same. The dynamic range seemed to be pretty much the same. But what's worth mentioning is just how good the RAW is with these cameras. So when you compare it to the JPEGs, you actually get a really nice control of the image. You get to really dig into those shadows, you get to really pull down those highlights, and you get to move colors around in the way that you can do that with RAW with just about any other camera. Of course, it's not the best RAW in the world, you can't do a ton with it, but what you can do with it, I think, is pretty impressive, again, from this tiny little camera. So the last thing I want to talk about is not the functionality of the Hero 6 itself, but an additional feature that you get with your mobile phone. So with the GoPro app, you now have an additional app called Quick Stories, or the Quick app. And what it does is it allows you to download all the footage very quickly onto your smartphone, and then it selects from that footage and basically does an auto edit for you. The first time I did this, I thought it was super cool. I was totally blown away by it, and I thought, man, this is gonna save so many people so much grief, so much time, and it was super rad. And when I showed it to people, they were like, that's so cool. But the cool factor quickly fades for me, and that's because I do obviously so much editing. And what I really started to hate about it was that it didn't get the control out of it that I wanted to. Its algorithm just sort of picks these random weird moments and not the best moments. Now, it has the highlight function, which when you're importing the footage into the app, you can select sort of like a highlight or the best moment. But what I find is that it doesn't necessarily select those, or it selects all these other random points that were just like me moving the camera or me checking something, not necessarily the footage that I was intending to shoot. It also sort of does it automatically in a sequential fashion, depending on how you imported your clips. So you can mix them around, but you can't split the clips. So it never actually goes back and sort of cuts back and forth between clips. It sort of does one, then it cuts to the next. And then you can go in and you can trim or edit your clips, but you can only really trim them. So really, if you wanted a kind of a better edit out of it, you would have to go into your phone, go into your camera roll, and duplicate a bunch of these, trim them all to like different, parts of the video, and then put them into the app, scramble them in the app, and then maybe you get a better cut. But what I found was that it just wasn't giving me the best cut possible. What I will say though, is it's still really cool. You don't need to know anything about editing, and that really opens up all the possibilities for people buying and using GoPros, because they don't have to deal with any post-production stuff anymore. They can take it on a trip, they can take it to a concert, they can take it to the beach, they can put it on their mountain bike, whatever you want to do, and immediately from where you're standing, you can dump the footage on your phone. It makes the video for you. It's got really cool music, really cool transitions, and you can upload it to the web all within the span of a couple minutes, and you're a star. It's awesome. So final thoughts. The Hero 6 is what the Hero 5 should have been. It looks like GoPro took seriously the competition that was in the field, and they adapted and they made an incredible camera. In fact, this is the first GoPro I've actually ever wanted to own. I've always thought action cams to be kind of a novelty. You never really do much with the footage, or I don't know, it just seems like you're gonna buy it and it's gonna sit around. But this is the first time that I thought, I would use this a lot. This is a great camera. It produces a really nice image. The dynamic range is incredible. The photos look great. You get a lot of control with it. And to have something this small that you can just carry around with you is pretty remarkable. So overall, I think I'm super happy with this camera. I think consumers are gonna love it. And it's gonna be interesting to see what other manufacturers do now to compete with this new technology that GoPro has shown they've mastered to some degree. We've got a little ways to go in terms of the highest frame rates, and we still have a ways to go in my opinion in terms of stability, but it's pretty impressive, I have to say. All right, so that's about it. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it. And as always, subscribe to our channel because we've got a lot more videos like this coming your way, as well as like this video and comment on it. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And of course, we're on the YouTubes, as you know, but we're also on the Instagrams, the Facebooks, the Twitters. We're on all the things. Until then, go out there, have some fun, and happy shooting.